The email came in at 8:43 a.m. Subject line, "Appreciation for your initiative on process streamlining." I hadn't sent any initiative. I hadn't even opened the damn folder labeled Efficiency Realignment. Still, there it was. My name attached to a 47-page internal audit that apparently I had authored. The document was polished. Too polished. The kind of synthetic corporate perfection that reeks of legal coaching and plausible deniability. Every sentence bled compliance jargon, operational redundancies, non-essential expenditures, streamlined reporting chains. I skimmed the first 2 pages before my coffee went cold. By page 3, I understood exactly what this was. It was a weapon, and someone had loaded it with my name. The meeting invitation arrived minutes later. Leadership Town Hall, Department Realignment Brief. Presenter, Grant Mercer, VP of Operations. The same man who once called me our quiet little rulebook in front of the board. A compliment meant to shrink, not praise. Grant liked to perform leadership. He spoke in buzzwords and PowerPoints, the kind of man who believed bullet points could replace ethics. His office smelled of cologne and fresh printer ink, always ready for an audience, always rehearsed. At 9 a.m., the Zoom grid flickered to life. Grant appeared center frame, teeth too white, suit too tight, eyes too bright with triumph. Behind him, the company logo shimmered like it approved. "Before we dive in," he said, smiling, "I want to recognize the dedication of our compliance division, especially Elena Voss for initiating a deep dive audit into our internal expenditures. Her diligence has given us the insight to restructure effectively." My stomach went still. 50 faces on screen turned toward my little square, waiting for me to smile. I unmuted my mic, then stopped. He had muted me. Grant continued without pause. Her report identifies significant redundancies in our regional teams. It's never easy to make these decisions, but responsible leadership means facing hard truths. He clicked to the next slide. A list of names. 10 positions marked, to be consolidated. Every one of them reported to me. No warning, no discussion. Just erasure, neatly formatted in Arial 11. I watched him talk about operational agility while my colleague stared in quiet disbelief. My name, glowing beside the fake audit title, gave legitimacy to his cuts. It wasn't incompetence, it was theft. Intellectual, procedural, ethical. I felt the heat behind my eyes but said nothing. Instead, I reached for the small silver ring on my right hand, a nervous habit I'd learned to disguise as thoughtfulness, and clicked, record meeting. His words flowed like oil. "We're grateful for the transparency Elena brought to this process," he said. "Her findings will guide the next phase of efficiency alignment." He didn't look at me once. When the call ended, the chat filled with polite condolences. "Tough day. Hang in there. Restructures always hurt good people." The kind of digital pity that evaporates as quickly as it's typed. I sat in the afterglow of that silence, cursor blinking on the audit file I supposedly wrote. My pulse slowed. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, all layered under a cold, methodical clarity. I dragged the file to my desktop. Opened properties. Created, 11:32 p.m. 2 nights ago. Modified, 12:47 a.m. Editor, G. Mercer at vitracom.io. Sloppy, arrogant, predictable. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the quiet. In compliance, we're trained to treat truth like evidence, unemotional, documented, time-stamped. Justice doesn't come from outrage. It comes from order. Grant thought he'd buried me under my own audit. He didn't realize he'd just left fingerprints all over the shovel. I didn't call HR. I didn't send a protest email. I simply exported the meeting recording, saved it to a private, encrypted folder, and labeled it Voss Audit Realignment Phase 1. Then I closed my laptop, smoothed my blazer, and stared at my reflection in the black screen. One nod. That's all I gave myself. Not in defeat, in recognition. The game had started. By noon, the building smelled like burned coffee and fresh toner, 2 cents offices use to pretend nothing has gone wrong. My inbox didn't get the memo. Subject lines stacked like bricks. Realignment follow-up. Access change notice. Asset return checklist. Someone in IT, obedient, apologetic, had quietly revoked my edit rights on 3 compliance drives and converted me to read-only. A soft lock. Polite handcuffs. I opened the audit they'd hung around my neck and slowed my breathing the way we're taught during incident response. You don't fight the flood. You sort it. Page footer. Tiny, gray, red, Doc ID, VR14C-Streamline. Nice of them to leave the breadcrumb. I checked the properties pane again. The author field had been scrubbed, generic compliance bot, but the last modified by still showed g.mercer@vitricom.io. He'd toggled the intermediary edits through a service account, then got greedy at the end. The signature block sat on page 46, prepared by Elena Voss, Senior Compliance Officer. The date was correct. The signature wasn't. We don't use scanned wet signatures at Vitricom. We use CertiSign, with per-employee certificates issued off an internal CA. Every applied signature writes an audit trail to the envelope's metadata: issuer, serial, timestamp, IP, hash. You can forge an image of my signature in 5 minutes with an old PDF and a steady hand. You can't forge the certificate chain without leaving scorch marks. I cross-referenced the envelope ID, ENV9Q2F7MT, in the CertiSign dashboard. Access required a second factor and an approval ping from our PKI admin. He still owed me a favor from the night I walked him through a panic over a misconfigured CRL. Approval popped in 20 seconds. The envelope lit up like a crime scene. Signer, Voss Elena, EVOS at Cert Serial 00F18A, not mine. Signing IP 73.219.41.18 at 0041 a.m. Device Mac OS 13.6 Chrome/118. I sign from a Windows machine, always through the hardened browser, always behind our ZTNA client. At 0041 a.m., I was asleep with my phone in airplane mode and my laptop shut in a drawer. Also, my certificate serial ends in 3C, a mnemonic I'd had for years. 3 clean. The envelope serial ended 8A, sloppy. I exported the CertiSign audit trail as CSV, hashed it, SHA-256, and dropped both files into my personal archive, Mirabelle, a private, read-only Synology with immutable snapshots and a cold spare drive I rotate into a safe deposit box every quarter. Paranoid? No. Experienced. The PDF's revision history told another story. OneDrive showed 5 versions over 48 hours with the same MD5 base except for minor text deltas. Version 3 included a stray comment bubble someone forgot to delete. Swap redundancies to duplication risk sounds kinder. The comment author was Grant.M. Version 4 had a track change toggled off around a vendor line item. External consultancy, StreamSpan Analytics. We don't retain StreamSpan. I've never approved them. The cost center matched operations, not compliance. I opened our vendor master and queried StreamSpan. New vendor, pending. Attachment, W-9 and a banking letter, Silicon Bank. Routing number I flagged mentally, last four 2211. Authorized approver, G. Mercer. Beneficial owner, undisclosed, LLC. That's not non-compliant in itself. It is when your conflict of interest policy requires related party attestation for any officer-level approvals. I scrolled the attestation field. Blank. Slack pinged. HR General. Hi, Elena. Brief check-in today? 3:30 works? No agenda, no attachment. No, we'd love your perspective. Just the soft smile before the door clicks behind you. I replied, happy to join. Please include a copy of the report attributed to me for the record. A minute later, a PDF arrived with a control watermark HREVID 1462. I printed it, 2-hole punched, slid it into a red folder labeled Counter. Paper feels archaic until you're testifying. Then it's a lifeline. Before the 3:30, I took a walk down to facilities under the pretense of picking up new badge lanyards. The floor is colder there. The HVAC hums like a held breath. I stood under the return vent and reread Section 9 of our Information Integrity and Sign-Off Policy, the one I wrote during the Belmore integration. Electronic signatures must be traceable to a unique certificate bound to the signer's identity. Delegated or proxied signing is prohibited absent written approval from the compliance office. My name sits under that paragraph on the policy wiki. I took a screenshot anyway, with the revision history expanded to show the date and my user handle. When I got back to my desk, a Teams window was already open. Grant, full frame, too close to the camera. He didn't invite me, he barged in. Elena, he said warmly, like we were co-conspirators. Tough morning. I'm sorry the optics landed on you, but this is what leadership looks like. Is it? I said. He chuckled. Listen, HR is going to run their process. Cooperate and we can keep your package intact. No need to get technical. The cursor hovered over the end button. I wanted to, but I let him keep talking. The more he spoke, the more he anchored himself to a version of the story he couldn't unwind from later. He lowered his voice. The audit needed a name with credibility. You're respected. This will pass. The certisign log says otherwise, I said. A flash, brief, then gone. I don't follow. ERV 9Q2F7MT, I said, and watched his throat move. Wrong certificate, wrong endpoint, wrong time. Technical jargon isn't helpful right now, he said, leaning back. We need alignment. Alignment requires accuracy. Elena, he said, smile tightening. Don't make this harder than it is. He ended the call without a goodbye. Classic. When people think they're holding a trapdoor lever, they stop checking the floor. I wrote my notes while the details were still warm. Times, names, exact phrases. No adjectives, no conclusions, just a clean chain of custody. Then I opened Sentinel, our SIM, and pulled a correlation query for logins to my account between 0:30 and 01 on the night the audit signed. Nothing internal, but the certisign IP resolved to a residential ISP in Walnut Creek. Grant lives in Walnut Creek. I didn't break anything. I didn't exceed access. I used the transparency every adult signed up for the day they accepted a badge. At 3:28, I walked to HR with the red folder under my arm. The corridor lights flickered, that faint ballast flutter that makes the air feel like a waiting room. The conference room was set at meat locker cold. 2 HR partners sat side by side with warm smiles and cool eyes. The printer in the corner exhaled a single page. Notice of investigatory meeting. No counsel present. Not required, but permitted. They hadn't told me that. I took the pen, circled permitted, and initialed in the margin. "Thanks for coming, Elena," the senior partner said. "We just want to understand your role in the report." I nodded once, placed the HR-stamped PDF on the table, and set a second sheet beside it. Certisign's audit trail, printed, highlighted, and clipped to a copy of Policy Section 9 with my name on the revision history. "I'll gladly walk you through my role," I said. "But first, we should start with the signature you're relying on." The door opened behind me. I didn't turn. The air shifted anyway, aftershave and the sweet, impatient scent of mint gum. Grant slid into the seat across from me, smiled, and folded his hands like a priest at a wedding. "Let's keep this simple," he said.
"Let's keep it correct," I replied. The senior partner cleared her throat, pressing record on her phone. "We're here to discuss allegations of falsified reporting," she began. I reached for the audit trail and felt the room's temperature finally catch up to the truth. "Great," I said. "Let's define falsified." The room smelled of printer toner and lemon sanitizer, the corporate version of fresh paint over rot. The blinds were half closed, sunlight cutting across the conference table in narrow blades. At the far end sat Grant Mercer, arms crossed, jaw flexing like a man auditioning for authority. Beside him, Dana from HR, polished, smiling, and already tired of pretending this was a conversation. "Let's begin," Dana said, pressing record on her phone. "For documentation purposes, this is a disciplinary review regarding internal compliance misconduct." Misconduct. A word sharpened to sound final. Grant leaned forward, voice syrup smooth. "Elena, this isn't personal. We just need clarity on your involvement in the internal audits circulated under your name." "I'm happy to provide clarity," I said, sliding the printed Certisign log across the table. "This is the signature verification from the document you're referencing." He didn't even look at it. "We've already reviewed that," he said, waving a hand like he was brushing away dust. "No, you reviewed a screenshot. This is the raw certificate data." I tapped the page. "It shows your device ID, Grant, not mine." Dana blinked. Let's keep this focused on process," she said quickly, eyes darting toward him. "We're not here to assign blame." I smiled faintly. "Of course, we're here to determine truth. Process is how you get there." Grant chuckled, low and dismissive. "Elena, you've done great work here over the years, but compliance can't operate without trust. You signed an internal audit that cost this company 10 roles. I didn't sign it." He exhaled through his nose like a teacher dealing with a stubborn student. "You're saying the system forged your name?" "I'm saying someone used your credentials to route a proxy signature at 12:47 a.m. from your home IP in Walnut Creek." A pause. The blinds rattled slightly as the HVAC kicked in. Dana shifted her tablet closer, typing something, probably a note to legal. Grant's expression didn't change, but the edges of his confidence began to fray. "That's a serious accusation." "No," I said calmly. "It's a data point." He laughed. The sound brittle, too loud. "Let's be honest. You've been under pressure lately. Maybe this was an oversight. Maybe you rushed something, forgot to document properly." It was the classic pivot. Gaslight, discredit, reframe. I'd trained half the managers in this building on how to spot that tactic in employee interviews. He was performing it like a script. Dana cleared her throat again. "Elena, HR's role here is to ensure everyone has an opportunity to respond. You'll have a chance to provide written feedback after today." Then I'd like a copy of this recording, I said. Internal files aren't typically shared, she replied smoothly. That's fine, I said. I'm recording too. Grant's head snapped up. You can't, in California, I said, keeping my tone even. All parties must consent. So if you're saying you don't consent, then neither of us records. Your choice. Dana froze. He hesitated. Then, predictably, he smiled. Fine, he said tightly. Let's stay professional. I nodded once, closed my phone's recording app and slid it face down. He smirked like he'd just reclaimed control. Good, he said. Then we'll move forward. As of today, you're on administrative leave pending further review. Turn in your badge at security by end of day. There it was. The quiet execution sentence dressed as policy. I didn't argue. I didn't plead.
I simply asked, "May I have written notice?" Dana produced a pre-printed form, the kind prepared before the meeting even began. I read it slowly, every word. Pending investigation into falsified reporting and misuse of compliance access. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Who authorized the investigation? Dana blinked. Excuse me? The policy requires authorization from the chief ethics officer, not HR, when the subject is compliance-related. Grant's jaw tightened. We're operating under my executive directive. Then your directive violates Section 11.2 of the Code of Conduct, I said. You may want to document that deviation before legal asks why this wasn't handled through ethics. Silence. A long one. Dana glanced at Grant, uncertain now. He forced a smile. We're done here. Agreed, I said, rising. I collected my folder. Red, neat, precise. And paused at the door. One more thing. He didn't look up. When you modify metadata on a PDF, it updates the hash checksum. The document you sent to HR doesn't match the checksum in the version control system. And let that hang in the air. Dana looked between us, confused. Grant stared straight ahead, but his hand twitched. A tiny, involuntary motion that said more than words ever could. Enjoy your afternoon, I said quietly, and left. By 6 p.m., my access badge had been deactivated, my email frozen, my calendar scrubbed. The usual digital purge. But they missed one thing. The mirrored backup from my compliance drive. Every revision, every signature, every audit log was replicated automatically to an offsite archive. My archive. I poured a glass of wine, opened the mirrored file, and watched the audit's history play backward. Timestamps, edits, usernames. Then I noticed something buried deep in the metadata trail. A hidden tag labeled SS Consult. I clicked it. A reference ID. Vendor line. StreamSpan Analytics. The same consulting firm Grant had paid through operations. I leaned back in my chair, feeling that familiar electric calm. They thought they'd stripped me of access, but they'd forgotten who wrote the access rules. Tomorrow, I wouldn't call HR. I'd call internal audit and the audit committee chair. But tonight, I just stared at the red folder on my desk and smiled. The trap wasn't mine anymore. It was his. The night after the HR ambush, the city outside my apartment felt unnaturally still. No sirens, no traffic, just the faint electric hum from the street lamps below my balcony. It was that kind of silence that happens before something changes. Not peace, but pause. I set my laptop on the kitchen counter, next to an untouched glass of Cabernet,
and opened a folder that didn't officially exist. /vault_intent/shadow audit. I'd created it 5 years ago, after watching a director bury a harassment complaint under insufficient documentation. I learned then that truth doesn't survive in inboxes. It survives in backups. I began sorting through the mirrored compliance logs, contract approvals, payment authorizations, digital signatures, vendor records. Each folder nested into another like a set of Russian dolls, each one a piece of someone's story they thought no one would ever read. Grant Mercer's name appeared in nearly all of them. At 10:42 p.m., I found what I was looking for, a vendor invoice trail for StreamSpan Analytics, the phantom consultancy listed in the forged audit. The payments were split into small increments, routed through Operations Discretionary Fund, the kind of account that never triggered automated red flags because it was buried under vendor pilot programs. The account number led to Brightleaf Consulting, LLC, registered under an address in Walnut Creek. I searched the California Business Registry, fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard. Brightleaf's managing partner? Thomas Mercer, Grant's brother. There it was, the artery connecting every falsified document to his personal life.
And the digital fingerprints were all over it. But truth without structure is noise. So I started building structure. First, the timeline. Every transaction, edit, email, and login stacked chronologically, color-coded by source. Red for Grant, blue for HR, gray for the proxy account he'd used to fake my signature. Then the evidence chain. Screenshots of CertiSign logs, timestamps cross-referenced against payroll access hours, the Slack messages confirming Grant's late-night edits. I archived it all with SHA-256 hashes, wrote a brief summary note. Dry, factual, surgical. The kind of document auditors loved because it didn't sound emotional. At midnight, I drafted the email. Not to HR, not to legal. To Audit Committee Chair at vitracom.io. CC, Internal Audit Director at vitracom.io. Subject, Compliance Irregularity, Unauthorized Signature and Vendor Conflict of Interest. The message was short. Attached are documents indicating a violation of internal control procedures involving unauthorized use of compliance credentials and unregistered vendor payments. Relevant data sources and verification logs included. Request independent investigation in accordance with the audit charter. I added the attachments, encrypted them, and set the email to auto-send at 7 a.m. sharp during the committee's daily compliance review slot. Then I closed the laptop and exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not yet. More like the calm before a fuse catches. I walked to the window. Across the city, windows flickered with tired blue light. People finishing work, sending reports, trying to stay afloat in their own quiet wars. I thought about every woman I'd watched get sidelined with grace, every apology written just to keep a paycheck. I promised myself this would not end that way. By 9 a.m., the dominoes began to tilt. Grant's team received an urgent verification request from Internal Audit, asking for documentation on all consultancy expenses approved under operations in the past 2 quarters. His assistant, confused, forwarded it to him, accidentally CCing me. I watched from my personal inbox as the thread unfolded in real time. Grant Mercer, handle this quietly. No need to involve compliance. I've got it covered. Internal Audit. Compliance originated the inquiry. They're copied on our end. He must have realized then that the trail wasn't contained. At 11:14 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Voss, this is Elena Voss, Chair of the Audit Committee. Are you available to discuss your submission? Her voice was even, unhurried, the tone of someone used to cutting through chaos with precision. Of course, I said. We met at 2 p.m. in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor. I expected formality, distance. Instead, she offered me coffee and listened. Really listened. I handed her a printed copy of my timeline and the signed verification logs. When she reached the vendor section, she stopped. Thomas Mercer? His brother, I said. The payments route through Brightleaf Consulting. She closed the folder gently, like a verdict forming in her mind. This stays between us for now. You did the right thing documenting it. We'll handle the rest. There was no promise of protection, no dramatic reassurance, just professionalism, quiet and solid as marble. That was enough. By evening, my name had resurfaced in the company directory. Access restored. Badge reactivated. No announcement, no apology. Just the quiet reinstatement that says someone realized they might need you again. And somewhere in the building, Grant was realizing he was no longer the one holding the narrative. He'd fired me on paper, but tomorrow he'd wake up to find the auditors in his inbox, his expense accounts frozen, and his own words quoted back to him in a report bearing his name. Justice wasn't coming with noise or spectacle. It was already here, wrapped neatly in evidence and timestamps. I looked at the clock. 11:58 p.m. The auto-send confirmation flashed on my screen. Email delivered successfully. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not peacefully, but purposefully. By the time the elevator doors slid open on the 34th floor, I already knew. You can feel when an organization changes temperature, when gossip moves slower, voices drop to whispers, and even the printers seem to pause between pages. Something had shifted. The morning air in the office was unnaturally still, brittle. I passed a line of analysts pretending to work, eyes darting toward operations like moths to a blue flame. Every desk I walked by was a small stage of fear, hushed conversations ending mid-sentence, Slack chats snapping shut when I passed. Word had spread. Internal audit was in the building, and Grant Mercer was no longer leading his own meetings. At 9:15 a.m., a calendar alert appeared. Operations review, attendance required. No subject, no agenda, just a location. Board conference room, 34th floor. When I walked in, the tone hit me like static. The room was arranged for confrontation. 12 chairs, none left empty. At the head of the table sat Elena Voss, Audit Committee Chair, calm and poised, with her signature black fountain pen and a thin folder in front of her. To her right, the Compliance Director, face unreadable. 2 board advisors joined remotely, silent boxes on a glass screen. And across from me, Grant Mercer, trying very hard not to look cornered. His tie was perfect, his smile even more so, but the gloss had cracked. His cufflinks were misaligned, a detail only noticeable to someone who'd once seen him lecture interns on optics as leadership. "Elena," Helena said, her voice steady as iron under silk. "Thank you for joining us. We're conducting a review of operations' recent vendor expenditures and internal audit procedures. Since your signature was attached to one of those documents, we felt your perspective would be valuable." She didn't look at Grant when she said it, but everyone else did. I took the seat directly across from him, opened my folder, and met his eyes. He was trying to gauge how much I knew. I let him wonder. Helena began with the formality of a surgeon preparing for incision. "Mr. Mercer, we've reviewed the documentation for StreamSpan Analytics. We noticed payments routed through an unverified LLC and approved without secondary sign-off." Grant adjusted his watch. "It was a pilot initiative, exploratory contracting. We had verbal clearance." "From whom?" Helena asked. He hesitated. "From myself as acting sponsor." "And your brother, Thomas Mercer,
she said, flipping a page, is the registered agent for Brightleaf Consulting, the intermediary receiving those funds. Grant froze. Not visibly, but enough. A blink too long. That's a coincidence, he said quietly. It's also a violation of Section 8.4 of the Conflict of Interest Policy, the compliance director added. Helena turned to me. Elena, would you confirm how this came to your attention? I nodded once, the same small gesture that had started everything. During metadata verification of the internal audit attributed to me, I noticed unauthorized access logs. The signatures were proxied through Mr. Mercer's credentials. The attached vendor matched a non-compliant payment chain. I documented and escalated accordingly. Simple, factual, every word clean. Helena leaned back. You submitted this evidence to the audit committee without notifying HR. Why? Because HR was already compromised, I said, glancing at Grant. They were operating under his directive. I followed the chain of integrity, not the chain of command. The room went still. You could feel the oxygen shift. Grant tried to recover his footing. These are wild accusations. Elena's been under stress. She's retaliating after being disciplined for misconduct. Helena raised an eyebrow. The misconduct based on a forged signature? His mouth opened, but no sound came. The compliance director slid a document across the table, a printed page stamped Confidential, Internal Audit Findings. Mr. Mercer, he said, we've matched your personal logging credentials to 3 after-hours edits on the compliance audit file. The digital signature trace confirms they originated from your home network. You also accessed the same file 6 minutes before it was sent to HR from your account. Would you like to explain that? Grant's smile finally broke. It must have been a draft, a mistake. 3 edits don't look like a mistake, Helena said. They look like intent. He reached for his water glass but missed it slightly, fingers brushing the rim. The tiniest tremor. Helena continued, voice softer now, almost kind. Grant, this isn't personal. But you understand what falsifying compliance documentation means for a publicly traded firm. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was its own confession. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. My evidence spoke in timestamps and checksum hashes, language that doesn't argue back. After 20 minutes, Helena closed her folder. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn for now. When I stood, Grant finally looked up at me. A different look this time. Not arrogance. Not charm. Just the dawning understanding that the narrative had slipped from his hands completely. As I left the room, Helena's voice followed me. Low, steady, final. Mr. Mercer, we'll need your badge and company devices before you leave the premises. Outside, the air felt cleaner. I stepped into the hallway, exhaled, and leaned lightly against the cold glass wall. The city spread below, small and orderly, like an audit file waiting to be signed off. I didn't smile. I just adjusted my jacket, straightened my posture, and walked toward the elevator. Downstairs, I knew the whispers would already be spreading. Not about me this time, but about the VP who thought he was untouchable until the paperwork spoke louder. Grant had built his power on perception. I'd dismantled it with proof, and proof, unlike ego, doesn't vanish when the meeting ends. For 2 days after the meeting, the building moved like a stunned organism. Conversations dropped mid-sentence when I entered a room. HR suddenly developed the reflexive politeness of hostages. The company Slack, normally a cascade of hollow emojis and "great work, team!" exclamations, had gone quiet. Just the dull hum of people pretending not to read the news. I didn't have to guess what was happening behind closed doors. I could feel it through the timing of my notifications. 7:04 a.m., Access reinstatement confirmed. 7:06, new permissions granted. Internal audit workspace. 7:09, message from Helena Zhu. Full cooperation appreciated. Continue documenting independently. That was her way of saying, we're not done. The next morning, I was escorted, politely, into a temporary office on the 32nd floor. It was small, windowless, the kind of space where secrets are supposed to stay contained. On the desk waited a loaner laptop, already connected to the audit network, a secure badge, and a plain envelope marked Special Review Authorization. Inside, a single printed sheet. Effective immediately, Ms. Elena Voss is seconded to internal audit for the duration of the Mercer investigation. All prior restrictions lifted. Discretion mandatory. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 weeks ago, they'd called me a liability. Now I was an investigator. I opened the system logs. Hundreds of entries scrolled past, each a breadcrumb from someone's panic. Operations had been under review for only 48 hours, but the audit team had already uncovered 5 shell vendors linked to Brightleaf Consulting. Each one existed just long enough to process a single invoice, then dissolve into digital mist. Same routing number, different names. East Point Analytics, Green Bay Metrics, Ilara Solutions, StreamSpan, Viridian Insights. Classic laundering pattern, classic arrogance. Every transfer carried an approval code, GM Ops 7B. I recognized the prefix, Grant's internal project tag for budget efficiency initiatives. He'd used it publicly in quarterly reports, a traceable brag. I began cross-matching that tag against internal purchase orders. Within minutes, the pattern unfolded like an origami map. 1 invoice each quarter for 2 years. Amounts small enough to escape financial review, but large enough to build a quiet fortune. The total, conservatively, was just under $1.2 million. He hadn't only forged my signature, he'd built an entire false ecosystem under it. At noon, I met with Raj Patel, the lead forensic auditor, a soft-spoken man with the patience of a monk and the instincts of a bloodhound. He'd read my file. His first question wasn't about evidence, but motive. "Why didn't you go public sooner?" he asked. "Because evidence without timing is noise," I said. If I'd sounded the alarm before the paper trail was complete, it would have looked emotional, not factual. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You think like an auditor." "I wrote half the policy manual," I replied. By late afternoon, we had what we needed. The forensic team compiled a draft report, unauthorized vendor activity and document falsification, preliminary findings. It was 43 pages long, every claim backed by metadata, access logs, and financial records. They'd even traced Grant's edits back to a personal cloud backup he'd forgotten to wipe. Raj slid the printout across the table to me. "Take a look at Appendix C." Appendix C was a table of secondary sign-offs. Names, timestamps, digital IDs. 2 jumped out immediately. D. Lansbury and K. Wright, HR managers. "He had accomplices," I said quietly. Raj nodded. "They verified the consulting invoices as part of a training reimbursement pilot. We're confirming whether they received any of the funds." So it wasn't just him. He'd built a small circle of loyalty inside HR, people he could count on to approve paperwork without reading it. That explained the speed of my disciplinary review. They hadn't been protecting him out of fear. They'd been protecting themselves. At 6 p.m., Helena called. Her tone was different this time, measured, deliberate, the way people sound when they already know the answer but want to hear you say it aloud. "Elena," she said, "we've completed the first phase. The board has convened an emergency session tomorrow morning. We'd like you present as a technical witness." A heartbeat of silence. "You're certain you want me in the room?" "Yes," she said simply. "It started with your name. It should end with it." That night I walked home through the drizzle. The city glowed the way it does after rain, soft, metallic, forgiving. Inside my apartment, the red folder still sat on my desk, the same one I'd carried into HR weeks ago. I opened it, slipped in a printed copy of the new report, and sealed it shut. I thought about Grant, about how he'd probably spent the evening calling lawyers, rewriting his own history, convincing himself that if he just said the right sequence of words, he could still win. Men like him never believed they could actually lose. At 11:23 p.m., a notification blinked across my screen. Final audit draft uploaded to board archive. I opened it briefly. There, on the cover page, sat my name under prepared by, this time properly signed, properly time-stamped, immutable. Elena Voss, Senior Compliance Officer, Acting Internal Audit Liaison. The irony made me laugh quietly into the empty room. For months, Grant had weaponized procedure to erase people. He used policy as a disguise for power.
Now, those same policies were lining up behind him like mirrors, reflecting every decision he'd tried to bury. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a reckoning, built out of his own paperwork. Tomorrow, the board would read every page, and when they reached the final appendix, his forged signature beside mine, they'd see exactly how he'd fallen. Not from betrayal, from documentation. The boardroom looked different that morning. It wasn't the lighting, though someone had dimmed the fluorescent glare. It was the air, heavier, quieter, the kind of silence that sits before a verdict. At the far end of the table sat Helena Zhu, poised with her usual stillness, a presence that didn't need volume. Around her, 10 board members, each with their own stack of papers, the audit report marked confidential, preliminary findings. Grant Mercer sat near the middle, flanked by company counsel. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were red-rimmed from a night spent rehearsing half-truths. In front of him, a single glass of water, untouched. When I entered, every head turned, not with sympathy, not even curiosity, but with the wary acknowledgement reserved for someone who's just dismantled an illusion they all benefited from. Helena gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Ms. Voss, thank you for coming." I sat, slid the red folder onto the table and folded my hands. Helena began. "We are here to address the findings from internal audit regarding the falsified compliance report and associated vendor payments. Mr. Mercer, you've reviewed the document?" He nodded stiffly. "I have, and I want to state clearly, any irregularities were procedural, not intentional." "Procedural?" Helena repeated, tone soft but lethal. "You used your home network to forge a compliance signature at 12:47 a.m. and routed company funds to an LLC owned by your brother." Grant straightened, eyes narrowing. "Those payments were legitimate consultancy fees." "I have documentation." "Documentation you created," I said quietly, before I could stop myself. All eyes turned to me. Helena gave a small nod. "Go on, Ms. Voss." I met his stare. Every file tied to StreamSpan Analytics bears the same hash route as the falsified audit, an identical signature chain. That means they weren't created independently. They were cloned from the same corrupted source, from your machine. His lawyer tried to intervene, but Helena raised a hand. "Let her finish." I slid a single page from my folder, a printout of the Certisign audit log. "Here's the technical trail. IP address 73.219.41.18, registered to your residential network in Walnut Creek. That signature wasn't a system error, Mr. Mercer. It was you." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. The quiet compliance officer he'd dismissed as background noise was now spelling out his professional obituary in his own language.
Helena leaned forward. Grant, we gave you every chance to explain, but the evidence is overwhelming. The falsified signature, the unauthorized payments, the collusion with HR to suppress review. This is not negligence. It's misconduct. He exhaled sharply. You think you can pin this all on me? Everyone here signed off on the same budgets. They wanted results. They just didn't ask how I got them. No one responded. The weight of that truth hung in the air like smoke. Helena's voice stayed calm. That may be true, but you're the one who left a paper trail. He laughed then, bitter, defiant. This company runs on hypocrisy. You all loved the numbers when they worked in your favor. Helena didn't flinch. We're not here to debate morality. We're here to enforce policy. She opened her folder, removed a single page and slid it toward him. Effective immediately, your employment with Vitracom is terminated for cause. All accounts are frozen pending external review.
Legal counsel will contact you regarding recovery of misappropriated funds. The sound of her pen clicking echoed through the room. Final, surgical. Grant didn't reach for the paper. He just stared at it, jaw tight, hands trembling in his lap. You're making a mistake, he whispered. Helena turned to me. Ms. Voss, would you confirm that the compliance systems have been secured? Yes, I said evenly. All access credentials revoked, vendor accounts locked. The audit archive is sealed under board authority. She nodded. Thank you. Then, without looking back at him, security will escort Mr. Mercer out. The door opened. 2 guards entered, not dramatic, not loud, just efficient. Grant stood, slow and deliberate, the way people do when they're trying to hold on to the last thread of dignity. As he passed me, he stopped. For a second, he seemed about to speak, but no words came. Only a look. A mix of disbelief and something close to regret. Then he walked out. The door closed with a soft click. Helena waited a moment before speaking. This matter will proceed to external auditors and potentially federal review. Ms. Voss, we'll need your continued cooperation. You've handled yourself with precision and restraint. Restraint. The only word that truly mattered. I nodded once. Always. When I stepped out into the hallway, the morning light was spilling through the windows, cutting across the marble floors in clean, straight lines. The kind of light that makes dust look like confession. Down below, I could see the plaza where employees gathered for their morning coffee, unaware that the man who'd signed their paychecks was, at that moment, being escorted out the back entrance. Corporate justice doesn't look like vengeance. It looks like process. Signatures, timestamps, and silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just walked back to my office, opened my laptop, and archived the final report. The system pinged, file locked. Version 8 of 8. No further edits permitted. Perfect, because there was nothing left to edit. The truth had been documented. The reckoning was complete. The building smelled different after he left. Clean air again, like someone had opened a window that had been painted shut for years. For 2 weeks, no one spoke his name out loud. Not Grant, not the VP, not even the situation. It became corporate folklore overnight, a whispered cautionary tale buried under the phrase, ongoing legal matter. But in every corridor, you could feel it, the shift, the quiet return of integrity. I came in early those days, not out of ambition, out of habit. Years in compliance teach you to measure peace not by noise, but by the absence of crisis. I'd make coffee, sit by the window,
and watch the first light scatter across the parking lot. It was always the same pale gold, but somehow it looked different now. My new office was on the 32nd floor, 3 doors down from Helena's. The plaque outside read, Elena Voss, Director, Ethics and Compliance Oversight. It wasn't the title that mattered. It was the clause beneath it. Reports directly to the Board Audit Committee. No intermediaries, no VPs, no shortcuts. Helena stopped by my first morning there, as precise as ever. She didn't congratulate me, just set a folder on my desk. Policy revisions, she said. Start wherever you like. The board wants your fingerprints on the new framework. Then, after a pause, we needed this, Elena. You reminded people that structure isn't control, it's conscience. When she left, I sat with that sentence for a long time. The official report went public 3 weeks later. The language was sterile, as all corporate apologies are. Following an internal review, Vitracom has identified discrepancies in financial reporting and implemented leadership restructuring to reinforce ethical governance. No names, no details. Just enough to satisfy investors without feeding headlines. But the markets noticed. So did our employees. By the end of the quarter, anonymous feedback on the internal survey jumped 27%. People were reporting misconduct again. Small things, conflicts, biases, outdated policies. But it mattered. For the first time in years, people trusted the system again. And trust, I realized, is the real currency of survival. One evening, long after most had gone home, I opened the archived audit folder one last time. Inside were the artifacts of everything that had happened, forged files, certisign logs, the original meeting recording, all the proof that had once kept me up at night. I scrolled to the bottom of the directory. The last entry caught my eye. Mercer Final Notice.pdf, timestamped the day of his termination. I hesitated before opening it. Then curiosity won. It wasn't from him. It was about him. A standard HR closure memo, recorded for compliance. All company property returned. Exit interview declined. Statement on record. Tell her she won. I stared at those 4 words until the monitor dimmed. Tell her she won. I didn't feel triumph, not even satisfaction. Just a deep, steady exhale. The sound of something finally settling. He had tried to bury me with process. I had simply outlasted him with truth. By spring, the office had a new rhythm. The leadership that replaced Grant came from inside the company, the quiet ones, the problem solvers, the people who had once been invisible. I sat in meetings and watched them speak with the calm of people who no longer feared retribution for being right. That was the real victory, not the promotion, not the public vindication, but the restoration of fairness, fragile, imperfect, but alive. I kept the red folder locked in my bottom drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every corporate betrayal begins as a small compromise. Every injustice starts as a misfiled document, a silent nod, a moment someone decides to look away. I looked, and I didn't flinch. The night I finally left that building for good. My choice, not theirs. The lobby lights flickered on as the cleaning crew came in. The receptionist waved. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant and rain. I walked out without a box, without ceremony. Outside, the city glowed soft and blue under the rain. I paused on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, and looked up at the tower. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glass facade, small, precise, untouchable. That was enough. I'd learned something about power. It doesn't live in titles or offices. It lives in documentation, in the quiet, unglamorous act of keeping the receipts when no one else bothers to. Justice doesn't roar. It whispers, in footnotes, in timestamps, in signatures. And sometimes, it looks exactly like a woman nodding once, before the entire system finally listens.